There's Veda.
Hello, darling.
Veda Austin is the remarkable woman we've been talking about who's doing the water work.
Talking about you all day
Behind
because
your
we
back.
have this woman called Sacred and Salty.
Oh,
And she has a question about salt. And I'm like, you know what? I know exactly the person who can answer this question. So for everybody that doesn't know Veda yet, which is basically impossible because Veda is so astounding. Veda is a water researcher who has taken the kind of the idea of Emoto stuff and blown it up into like literally the most exciting, most amazing body of research that anybody could ever.
If anybody even remembers what the bleep way back, there was a guy named Emoto who did these amazing work with water, pales in comparison to what Veda's doing.
Yeah, Veda's stuff.
That torch and has carried it to this new place that is jaw-dropping.
I'm just going to give you a quick intro, Veda, because it's just so amazing. So I heard about Veda on Gordon White. So shout out to Gordon White because Gordon's fabulous. And I went to Veda's website, and Veda has these Petri dishes of ice sculptures, right? And so the first thing you see is that there's like a hand. Veda puts her hand on the Petri dish, and it's like, yeah, a hand comes out. And like, that's a pretty amazing situation that the ice made a crystal that looked like a hand. And then Veda puts a hair plait on the crystal, and the hair crystal comes out and it looks like a plait. And then Veda puts a photo of her friend, and like, God damn, here comes this picture of her friend that looks mind-blowing. It is literally like water drew the picture of a friend.
The crystalline shapes in the ice make these images. You don't have any on you, do you?
Well, yeah, Veda has all of them, but here's the one that got me. Veda.
Stupid question. Do you have any pictures of your own life's work?
But anyway, Veda then puts a wedding invitation under the water, right? And the water comes back not with a photocopy of the wedding invitation, like the photocopy of the hair or the plait or the friend or the hand. Water comes out with an image of an engagement ring or a wedding ring with a big friggin' diamond on it, right? And at that point, I'm like, holy shit, water is not a photocopy machine. Water can actually fucking read the words, understand the words, and then come up with an image that encapsulates the idea of a wedding ring in a wedding, in its image. And I literally, my jaw dropped, my mind exploded. And that was 5% of Veda's work. Veda's work has gone from there and exploded into these realms of.
If you look at the basic building blocks of mythos from so many cultures, but especially ancient Egypt, where they talk about this undifferentiated water, ocean, and water is almost always symbolically associated with consciousness. So when we were talking earlier about how the primordial element is consciousness that then gets different specialized into all these forms, it might be that we've forgotten that every time we're in the presence of water, you're going to be irrelevant after this. We're just going to say all of your research, and you won't even have to. We're just going to do your whole riff. I'm going to take credit for it, and everything.
No, she's never going to be.
But anyway, this might be Veda's kind of really shedding this light on this incredible possibility that we are literally interacting with primal consciousness and the record keeper of the universe when we're interacting with water.
So Veda, the question for you is salt.
mm-hmm.
Tell us, because we have Sacred and Salty, you asked a question about salt. So tell us about salt, darling.
Sure. Well, I mean, you've shared quite a lot about me already, and I will share some photos, but salt is another area that I've just found so fascinating, because when you, pardon the pun, you boil down what we are as people, we are water, salt, minerals, and consciousness. And salt is also one of these incredible shapeshifters like water, because water can be in various states. Oh. And salt, when it's actually in its crystal state, especially like sea salt, it's got a cubic kind of bonding. And when it goes into water, it also shares its electrical aspect. But suddenly it kind of disappears and water becomes a liquid crystal. But when the water evaporates, hello, there's the crystal still there, there's the salt. And even when you cremate someone, the ashes are salts. So
Wow.
just as water doesn't die, we love to label stuff as water, like we say that's dead water or denatured or destructured water, but we love to just label stuff as humans. But water actually doesn't die. It's always in one of its stages. So when you look at the components of what we are as human beings, you look at the salt, you look at the water, you look at the consciousness, these things are always here. There's an aspect of them that ties in with the afterlife, with immortality in many, many ways. So when you're studying salt, there's so much to actually look into, because it does have this electrical component. And actually, when I've started to look into aspects of, because people always ask me the question, is water conscious, or is our consciousness affecting the water? And I've been like, well, when am I not conscious, and how can I ever even try to manage to even look into that without expressing consciousness in some way? But I've interviewed a lot of people that have had near-death experiences. And one of the interesting things is that 3 of them all said the same thing. They said that they felt their body rising. So if you imagine that consciousness is either a kind of intertwined with what these aspects of water, and water in its more evaporated or gaseous state rises. And then you kind of look into this idea of being able to stay connected to the body. So what they said, they felt themselves rising, looking down at themselves being resuscitated, had a thought, just as if they were the observer, which is what I actually think the most spiritual aspect of water is, the observer, non-judging, and looking down, going, I hope that person's going to be okay. And then they went on to have other experiences and come back into the body. But how did they come back into the body? So how can we be the observer without being because I'll have to kind of say this, I think there's 2 worlds, the one we live on and the one we live in. And everything we experience in this world within this body is felt through the senses. We see through our eyes, hear through our ears, taste through our tongue, touch through our fingers. And it's all very, very sensory. So the way we experience the world is all within this bodily realm. So what do we experience outside of this body? And what we experience outside of this body is that we can observe ourselves. So this is exactly what happened when these people had near-death experiences. My son broke his arm the other day. Well, actually, I'm exaggerating. It was about 3 months ago. And it was a pretty bad break, and he had to go to the hospital, and they had to really pull on his arm to set the bones. And so they said, no, we're going to have to give him something called ketamine. And
Wow.
and
Oh,
it was, the doctor was like, this is going to be really quick. Rama's going to be in the room, but he's not going to be in the room. I'm like, okay, he's 15. And so he had this intravenous shot, and within 4 seconds, Rama said, what the fuck? And then he couldn't finish. And then his mouth was open, his eyes were bulging. You could see he's like looking around, but he can't feel a thing.
Wow.
And as he came around afterwards, I asked him the questions. I said, what happened? And he said, I could see them doing that to my body. I was looking at them from above at the top of the room. He said, I could see you. I could hear you, Mum. I heard you talking to the doctor. He said they also went down into these like wormholes and vortexes and had this full experience, came back into the body. He said he really couldn't have any reference for what he experienced. But what was interesting is, again, this is my son observing himself. And so how does that tie into water? Well, the Maori word for spirit is wairua, my dad's Maori. It means 2 waters, which are the physical and the spiritual waters. And I think both within us. I think we have this, and I've brought in salt. I'm not forgetting about the salt, because salt gives us this electrical charge as well, like piezoelectricity. And so long as we have some form of electrical charge, this observer aspect is able to come back and forth and track along the charge. So the charge can be felt by heart math, how the energy of the field of the body. And so because we have this energetic field, but we forget we're in an ocean already, there is water all around us. That water is attracted to our electrical charge that extends out of our body, giving us this kind of energetic web where we can feel energies in a room, connect to other people. It's where we have that kind of, I feel like I've known you somewhere before, or that love of sight kind of feeling, because each other's patterns can sometimes be very similar. The more similar they are, the more the connection is. But what's interesting is that even with those people whose hearts had stopped beating, one guy's heart had stopped beating for 20 minutes, and he was able to come back into the body. But even after death of the heart, the brain keeps having some sort of charge for around 10 to 15 minutes. But I had Dr. Jerry Pollack on one of my masterclasses that you were on the other day. And he was saying that when they did this experiment where they stopped the heartbeat of a chick starting to develop in the egg, when they stopped the heartbeat, they observed that the EZ water, or the special type of water that they were observing, kind of the chart went down as soon as the heart stopped beating, but it didn't go all the way down. It came back up again. And it kept going and moving. And when it went near when they applied infrared light, it expanded all the way back up again. And then when they removed the infrared light, it came back down again. But it took a long time, over an hour, for it to stop moving. And he suggested that might be that we don't really know exactly when we're dead, if you consider this connection with water. So as long as there's some movement, it's creating a kind of charge which allows the spirit or the soul to come back into this physical body. So it's a very, very interesting aspect. Water is the observer, observing yourself in dreams. That's been something that I've studied a lot of. So salt is a very important piece. You know, you see and hear the word salt and water in all kinds of religious texts as well, in creation stories. And so salt is a very, very powerful thing. And I think it's also a way in which we can keep water structure to hold the blueprint of the original spring. What I mean by that is this, is that for a long time, we use these blanket statements called structured water. And we have these images and ideas that all of our water that's structured looks like the Emoto's geometries. But actually, water is very sensitive in its liquid stage. In its liquid stage, it's updating its information every trillionth of a second. It is molecular chaos. Wow. But as it begins to slow down and then completely freeze, once it's completely frozen, it's actually in its, what is it? Yeah, it'll be too late. Just give me 10 minutes, darling. Sorry, it's Christmas here, and people are like, children are asking me questions.
Say hi to your husband for us.
But when it's a complete solid, it's in a state of suspension. But as it's in the in-between stage, and I always say the secrets are in the subtleties in between, it starts to slow down and is able to basically design imagery as it's freezing, but before it's frozen. And that's the stage that I freeze my work and start to see either what I call signature patterns, which are the patterns of certain types of waters. Then I'll see art, like you were talking about the hand and the ring. I say that art is the heart of water. And then I see something called hydroglyphs, which really tie in, I think, more and more I study them with hieroglyphs, which are essentially symbols that repeat in ice. To say I have one hydroglyph, I need to have used a word influence. Water absorbs the energy of words. It doesn't read words. And then it crystallizes into the energy of that word. So to see the same pattern occur using the same word at least 50 times, that's when I would say I have one hydroglyph. And I have 36. They have conceptual meanings. They have layers of meaning, and they're similar to hydroglyphs in that they're sharing something that is meant to be seen and felt and conceptualized rather than kind of broken apart. So when you are looking at all of these aspects. And then you think, well, how can water stay structured when it's sitting on a shelf and it says structured water when it's in its liquid stage? So I had a healing experience with water, which if anyone wants to look at any of my podcasts, you'll probably find me talk about that. So I don't have time, but essentially I found a spring water with a natural pH of 9.9 out of the ground. And I think there are different medicine waters around the world. And this was one of.
Wow. So that's why people make pilgrimages to bodies of water, that healing water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said bodies of water, because in old times, didn't used to call water. We used to call water the waters. And then when plumbing came into being with like the Romans creating plumbing, it turned into water because we started to see it taking away effluents. And now we kind of break it down to H2O. But actually where we keep the waters as a language, it's when her waters broke. So in that sacred body of water. So it's very interesting as you start to watch how we've started to change. We start to change our language and we sometimes forget how revered water was. But when you start to think, well, how can my water stay structured? Knowing this information, I had the same question. And because salt is such a powerful substance that we probably really need to learn a little bit more about. But when you make sole, which is very easy to do, you get a glass jam jar, you get chunks of your best salt you can find, which is not ground. You want the big chunks of sea salt or genuine Himalayan salt or these kinds of things. And then you fill that water with the best water that you can get. I love spring water. If you can collect it yourself, all the better. And then you leave it overnight or you leave it for 2 nights. You'll get a residue at the bottom. And then you take a teaspoon of the liquid water, because the residue shows that the water's absorbed all the salt it can, kind of like the Dead Sea. It can't absorb any more salt. You take some of that salt, you add it a teaspoon to a liter of the best salt, of the best water you've got. And what I've done to see whether or not that actually helps the water to keep its structural integrity is that I have a friend called Laurent Costa. He wrote a book called Journey into the Heart of Water. I wanted to send him 2 samples, one with the water with Soleil and one without the Soleil, to see whether the structural patterns would stay consistent. And his work is much like Emoto's. He's able to look through a microscope and take the photos crystallographically, but microscopically, whereas mine is macroscopic. And so what he did was send these 2 samples, both in blue glass. Light water is very sensitive to artificial light. So blue glass, one with Soleil, one without, both from this beautiful spring water. It didn't get to him in France. I live in New Zealand. It went to the wrong address. It came all the way back to New Zealand. I'm like, no, all the MF, it's going to be like crazy. And anyway, they sent it all the way back to France and it finally got to him. And he took the sample pictures. He couldn't see very much structure within the water that had not got the Soleil, but in the one with Soleil, it was glorious. It was such an incredibly beautiful picture, and you could almost see a blue light coming out of the kind of water crystal that looked much like a starlight. So it was really telling to see that the power of salt, not only as a preservative for our foods and things like this, but it's kind of like a preservative of memory. It's because we have salt in the body that we have cellular memory. And I think that when water is distilled, I don't see as much imagery. That's because it's more of an observer. Spring water is like water that has both the observer component, but the active participant, making memories, storing memories. Wow. So I think that hopefully that's something helpful, but I'm more than happy to share a few photos and then hop off and go and check.
I really want to see, do you happen to have it chilled me. It raised the hairs on my arm when you sent me the Atef crown. I was not expecting that, especially the frivolous manner in which I undertook that presentation. And then you ended up
And sweetie, look, already Sacred and Salt is in love with you. She's going to stalk you now. So I will show that. And I know that you have it's Christmas Day for Veda, just so you know, and Veda has children, so we can't keep her too long. But
Maybe while you're looking those things up, I would really be interested in, you'd mentioned the presence of salt having to do with the possibly the animation or the consciousness of water. Have you done, I'd be really interested to know at what point water stops being alive and conscious. Like if you have desalinated water, what's the there's a certain kind of water that you drink,
the water from
leached water,
Distilled.
distilled water,
So,
ocean water. Have you done different states like stagnant lake water might be especially verdant? Is there, like, I think my first question is, are there any situations where water is dead? We've seen all those things about people who've microwaved water and then watered their plants with the microwave water and the plants instantly die. Is there a moment or a state of water where it loses its consciousness? And is there a state of water that is especially reactive?
well, I mean, I think this is a question a lot of people ask, and I'm really grateful that you asked it, Chance. But I would say that water, even tap water, even distilled water, these kinds of waters are more in a state of pending or in a state of potential, because I never, ever see water as dead. In fact, you might be surprised that tap water, even though it's full of pollutants and all kinds of heavy metals and various things like that, what I'm actually testing for with my work outside of the way in which water shares with me, with art and things like that. Sorry.
That's all right, darling. Look, we can do a whole interview with you, darling. Chance has been asking. In fact, do you want to just call it and we'll do a whole interview with you?
Sure. I mean, there's so much to talk about, and you guys are so inspiring to me because you've been such a link for my work, especially the more recent work, because I've been studying as a water researcher for 9.5 years, and it's evolved. So really what people are seeing is an evolution of water sharing conversations and information. And so the latest work that, because I recently was speaking at the annual water conference in Germany.
I told everybody you took Rupert Sheldrake's spot. I've been talking you up, darling.
Well, I'm glad I was able to hop on. It seemed I just thought, oh no, I'll just hop on. Maybe they're still going. So I'm glad I could be here. Thank you very much.
Look, let you go do Christmas and we'll do a talk. This, like when you're ready. He's got a million questions for you, right? Don't go do Christmas.
It's really only about 400, but
okay.
do you have the time? Do you have a minute or two to show any of your images? If you have the AdTab hat, my head would
I
explode.
already told everybody what to do.
Oh, okay.
And that's okay.
I can share some pictures.
If you have the time and the bandwidth, it is shocking to me. It is shocking to me.
Okay, so this is part of a podcast I did. It's just up, so I think there's some pictures up here. So this is the work of Emoto, and this is Laurent Costa. So the guy I sent the pictures to, I told you about in relation to the salt, and he did the test. These are his work. He was inspiring to me because he was getting actual imagery of faces and hearts and stuff. I thought that was really amazing, microscopically. So mine's macroscopic. So this is the first picture I ever took. I projected, well, basically I wanted water stored or held any information. So I was thinking I would project a thought into the water, but I noticed there was a bit of fluff floating around in the water. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's memory. And then I totally froze it solid and forgot about it. And when I pulled it out and held it up to the light, this was the photo that has launched 37,000 photos of water responding in a very intelligent, articulate way. I changed my
37,000 people. Listen to that. 37,000 images. That's crazy.
It's crazy. So this was the second photo I ever took using seawater. That's why it looks more feathery. It's different. It's also frozen solid. Again, I don't do that anymore. My freezing process only takes about 5 minutes. There's liquid on top, ice underneath, and I discovered it because I realized that there is a fourth phase of water, a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. And this is the area, the space of creation between liquid and solid. So you can see there's a fish shape here with his fins and his eye and his perfectly round gill. And so this is the difference between my techniques. This was my son did this. He projected the thought of an arrow into the water. You can see how much more clear it is. It's a very thin, it's only about 1 to 2 millimeters thick, the ice, but it's like etched in. So you can see that it actually looks like a metallic arrowhead. So he projected the thought of an arrow. His name's Rama. In Hindu traditional beliefs, they believe that Lord Rama always carries a bow and arrow, and that's why we're having that conversation. So I wanted to see if water could recognize faces. So
Now, I told people about this on Veda. I told them this. Isn't this insane? How accurate is that?
Yeah, so then I did Sadhguru, so you can see it's not random. And you can also see the size of the dish here. So this is a 10 centimeter diameter glass Petri dish that I use. So these are macroscopically huge. I overfroze this guy a little bit, but you can still see it's like kind of the face is coming out of the ice. And this was the photo influence. So I basically put a Petri dish of water on top of a photo for 30 seconds. I just happen to like that number. It's not too long, not too short. I freeze it using my technique. I pull it out, tip the water away, and photograph the remaining ice. I'm really interested in ancient Greek, Roman, Sumerian, Egyptian history. So I kind of go for things like coins sometimes, and you can see the influence there. And here are just some examples of my work. So you can see, for example,
Look
here,
at the baby. Wow.
yeah, I asked someone who was pregnant in the early stages of pregnancy to drink some water, and then she left the remaining water, because when you drink water, it's leaving an imprint in the water. So you can see the baby. The one underneath it, there was a Schnauzer dog that was drinking from this bowl at a cafe that was left out for thirsty dogs. And so I was that crazy woman that said to the waitress, I said, do you think I could get a takeaway cup so I could get some of that dog bowl water to test? And anyway, she must have been the weirdest thing she
at
ever.
restaurants.
And so so she gave me it, and it looks like an etching. It still amazes me. The middle one here is so interesting because my daughter had this really amazing book of birds, and so I played with doing lots of different things with water. So I actually got a page. It was a big one page of a close-up of an owl's face, and so I got some cardboard, and I put the cardboard down half of the owl, and I put the Petri dish of water on top of the cardboard, so it wasn't actually seeing, quote unquote, seeing the owl, and it created the other eye. Here we've got where I put my thumb into the water for a few seconds and then froze it. You can see that the nail here is chipped. What was interesting is that about 3 hours after I did this, my nail chipped in exactly the same place, which is very interesting.
Wow. That's huge, Veda. That's huge.
Yeah, it's shown me a lot of things that happened 3 or 4 hours later. Like one lady, she came to me, which is a friend of mine, and prior to her coming over, I'd seen this obelisk in the water, and quite often I'm more interested in what water wants to tell me. I don't really need water to show me that it can sort of see items around me or any of these things. So more and more now, I'm just interested to see what water will show me. So there was this perfect obelisk, and I'm like, I had no reference for it. I didn't see it around anywhere. But my friend came over a few hours later, and she said, you know, I've just been to this crystal shop. I got this amazing crystal. And she brought out this great big giant amethyst obelisk. And she said, oh, have you ever seen anything like it? And I'm like, well, actually have a look at this picture. And so there's just so many. This is just a small handful of them. Each one has
Wow, the krill. Look at the dolphin. Wow.
yeah.
What what's that called when you're on your tiptoes? That's a plie.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Oh my God, look at the pheasant or a peacock. Look at the peacock.
Yeah, it's a peacock
Wow.
flying. Yeah.
The flower, that is amazing.
You're acting like you've never seen these before.
I'm still amazed. They don't stop being amazing just because
I agree. I still get amazed seeing my work. And that's why I share it so regularly too, because people think that I know what's going to happen as an outcome, because they think that water is picking up on my consciousness. But there's so many cases now, more cases than not, that I'm not projecting anything specific into the water. More, I'm inviting water to share something with me, or I am like, sometimes to see whether or not water was conscious or not conscious, I would ask it questions I know had no kind of outcome for, or idea or mental picture for, like the word ego. I used the word ego, and water designed this great big giant body with the skinny little neck and this head looking outward and this giant balloon on top, like for the head. And it was fascinating, like just different words, asking if it can connect to my mum who passed away, and getting the most incredible response, which we can talk about again, which no one else knew about. And I had no idea what I would see. I asked water if it could just connect to my mum. So that was really special. Batman's here because my children do a lot of this work with me. I teach people all around. I've actually got thousands of people who've, sharing their work now since I teach them how to do it. And we always see one of three things: either art, signature patterns, or hydroglyphs. And so we can get into the hydroglyphs again when we have another conversation, but it's truly amazing.
You've compiled a list of hydroglyphs because certain things keep coming up, and you started thinking of it as literally water trying to communicate through this. Somebody asked earlier, the reason why seems significant is somebody asked earlier about symbols and about the specifically about hydroglyphs and hieroglyphs, and which came first, consciousness or symbols. And water is speaking in these symbols, because you wonder how did some human figure out how to start using symbols? We know everything we know because nature showed us how to do it. And so this thing, it's like the heralds a new age where we completely refocus on the world we live in. It's kind of the shift from the dead post-industrial, everything's mechanical idea to the animism idea. The whole reason, not the whole reason, but a big reason why we moved to Asia is this is the land of animism. All the stray dogs out on the street are people's ancestors, so nobody does anything to them. I mean, they really nobody does anything with stray animals because that very well might be one of your friends or relatives. And the idea of pervasive consciousness is a thing here. It's a load-bearing central pillar of reality here, where it's not even acknowledged in the West. And it makes me wonder who's keeping us from participating in the universe. We're like a synthetic implant in a body instead of an actual liver or something, that we've been abstracted from nature and changed to where we don't participate in it anymore. And then we are taught, oh, nature's dead. There's no such thing as nature. So that we don't focus on how we've been separated from nature. And then all of these, it seems to be a new kind of second puberty that society's going through, where we stop paying attention to the superficial and we start looking at the causal world that creates this world, and start looking at that. What the hell is that thing that makes me it makes me want to talk and do stuff and walk around? And what the hell is it? Nobody can even talk about it. But your work seems to be reintroducing us to a world that is entirely animated and conscious and responsive to us. Imagine the interactive video game that you're in when matter itself is responsive to us.
Oh yeah, it's what you're saying is amazing, and I'll show you the hat. I mean, unfortunately I can only show it to you. I'm afraid.
That rocks.
And that's great, darling. I already told everybody to go to Instagram. Wow.
So I was pontificating and holding forth. I had my special soapbox, and I was just droning on and on about the Atef crown on Veda's show.
I've repeated it too.
Tell me the circumstances where that happened.
Well, I was basically inspired by what you guys were saying, and also by Dr. Zapatera. And so I just went looking for a picture where I could find one of them having that crown. And so I basically just showed the water, the crown, like I got it on my phone. I got the picture up. I waved my petri dish of water over the top of it. Wow. and froze it. And so, I mean, it's a rare picture. It's very interesting.
Look at this. Just look at this.
It is. And I repeated it yesterday, and I got an almost identical image back. It was actually very, very interesting. I was going to share that with you, Venice, once I've done the Christmas thing. But recently I just posted something which I think is profound. So hydroglyphs are different than the art. I really want to talk about them very quickly, and I'm going to see if I can pull up, if you don't mind waiting.
Go, darling. Go, darling.
I'll just squeeze through past this whole thing. But I'd love, when we do talk, it'd be great to talk about the egg white too, which I think is a really important piece.
And sweetie, while you're looking that up, I'm just going to answer a question here.
Mhm.
Veda's partner did a whole series of water analysis on LSD and other entheogens. And what was really interesting, Sid, is that he did not get just one hieroglyph for these entheogens. He got a whole series. So there was kind of like a progression of hydroglyphs that told the story of LSD and other entheogens.
Imagine how long the shamanic.
What was
tradition
interesting,
happened and how-
he was doing plant medicines. So for plant medicines, there were four repeated patterns in a sequence. So the first picture for example, cannabis was like a visionary image. So that was the eye. And then there was another one, which I'm just forgetting right in this moment. But for all of them, there was a it might have been the living glyph, actually. So it's like a living visionary. So and then the other two we're still working out what they meant. But then when he did the same for magic mushrooms, he got again the same sequence, which is really advanced. But when he did LSD, which is different to plant medicines, he actually got a different sequence, which was very interesting. So I do have some hydroglyphs to show you, just so you know that what I'm talking about, because it's so hard to know unless you see.
I bet the LSD is more geometric and the naturally occurring ones are more soft and fluid.
Yeah, I'll have to get his whole thing up. I really want to start sharing his work more and more and more, because I think it's extremely important. So
and just the fact that it's 4 hydroglyphs instead of 1 is really cool, right? It's like a series.
Oh yeah, it's a sequence. And I think that actually this is why, because he did the study for a long time. But the other important thing was that my children taught me something really, really powerful. And I'll just tell you face to face. So I'm going to have to squiz through this. They're all patiently waiting for me. But I've been, my children have been watching me do this for so long. And sometimes I would I'd be holding up the eyes, take a photo. And then my daughter, she said to me, "Oh, Mummy, can I have the dish?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I gave her the dish and she started to eat the ice. I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Because it's good for me." I'm like, "Oh." And then a week or so later, her brother Rama did the same thing. I'm like, "Did Shanti tell you that?" He said, "No." Again, I noticed patterns. And then what was interesting is that because Ryan knew about that. And so over the course of time, I've been telling people who have been learning my technique, and they say, "Oh, my children do that too. The crystallography." I'm like, what do they know that we don't know? So when Ryan was doing the whole study on ayahuasca and different plant medicines, he would write the word ayahuasca, remembering it absorbs the energy of words and then crystallizes into the energy of words. I can talk an entire 2 hours on that one topic, but I won't. And so then he'd photograph it, but then he'd eat the ice. And after a week of doing that, he said to me, "I think I need to take this seriously," because he started to get some impact of that. But since then, I've been sharing that and inviting people to learn the technique to try it if it calls them. I've had people with insomnia, with headaches, with one lady that was on my masterclass. You guys might have heard her, Rachel. She'd had vaccine injuries, and she used this using words like connection. Words will come out of her, the right word will come out that the water will kind of absorb that energy of. And then when she ate it, she said she's totally healed now after 6 months of doing this. But she said water also took her on a journey with doing that, which I think is fascinating. So I'll just quickly come back to the screen share of the hydroglyphs. So as you can see here, they have more than one or more symbols, and I derive them their meanings by using words as my way of communicating prior to freezing. You can use like music and various things, but we'll kind of get to that at another time. But I do like what Rudolf Steiner said. He said, no one can design and create a world that was not already designed and formed out of thought.
Wow.
The human being thinks he creates intelligence, whereas he only draws intelligence from the universal sea of intelligence. So this is the, whoops, I'll move that over there. This is the hydroglyph, although of the word imagination. So I think we can learn a lot by what they look like. So I like my biomimicry. I've kind of teamed it up with something that I've think it looks like. But also then it says potential meanings. I've used those words and seen the image show up, but I just haven't had time to do it 50 times yet. Here are some more. What you're seeing is 64 examples of each one. So you can see that they are not random. Now, the one I want to talk about is this one, the message glyph. It looks like a triangle with a frill around it. Now, although this is a screenshot, so they're not very clear on my other, when we do it again, I'll show you the other version. But at the end of some of them, there are these kind of hearts at the end. And you see here. And so some of them don't have it, like this one doesn't. So this is saying what kind of message it is, and trying to understand it is still where I need help. But it's very interesting because when I asked water, excuse for all of that mucking around there, what a hydroglyph was, it answered in hydroglyphs. It answered with the message glyph and the living glyph. So what it's saying is that a hydroglyph is a living message.
Wow.
It is extremely potent. And this is, I feel like someone, the movie Arrival, where that woman is trying to figure out this language. But, you know, we are water by molecular count, not by volume. We're 99% water. We are communicating with the water outside of our body, and it's communicating with us. We can figure this out. We can understand this, but it's more about learning how to absorb energy and feel with our intuition what this means, how this works, what water is saying. The complexity of the creation glyph has been incredible. There are four aspects to it. The creation glyph here, this version of it has got these seeds, that's fire. And this is just waves on its own, which means water. The feathery glyph, which is part of the creation glyph, means air, and this speckledy aspect of it, and you can see how similar it is, but the speckledy area means earth. So within the creation glyph, there are all the elements, and I think there's also ether, which we can't, of course, ignore, which we can talk about later. And I have to go. I'm sorry. And
yes, darling, go. We love you. You're amazing. And send our love to the family.
Well, I can't wait to see you. Thank you for having me on. Nice to see you, everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Bye. Lots of love. Thank you guys again so much for being on my masterclass. You guys were amazing. Inspired so many people.
Bye, darling.
Bye. Bye.